Hello, it's time for City Corner, and today we're going to talk about city water and walking the blue line. Come on back. Hello and welcome to City Corner. I'm Robin Boyce, and I know you're going to really enjoy this episode of City Corner today. In the studios with me, we have Mr. Curtis Scobie, who is Director of Public Utilities, which is the water division for the city of St. Louis. I know a lot of people pay their water bills, so they understand that, you know, water is not free in St. Louis. But let's talk a little bit about the history. The water division actually was a private situation back in the 1800s, and then someone came in and took it over. Tell us a little bit about that history.
Yeah, in the early 1800s, there was a couple of private efforts to build a water system in the city of St. Louis. There was none beforehand. It's all well water or cisterns catching rainwater off the roof. And they had trouble getting started due to the capital outlay, so the city took it over and has run it ever since.
So the city of St. Louis has been operating the water system and making sure. Now, most of the water for the city of St. Louis, does it come out of the Mississippi River or the Missouri or Illinois, or how does it work?
We have two plants. One's on the Missouri River out in Chesterfield.
Okay.
And then our larger plant is on the Mississippi up at the Chain of Rocks.
Yes.
And that's, even though that's on the Mississippi, we draw from the western shore, which is still primarily Missouri River water.
Oh, so we still kind of draw water near that confluence area down there?
Just downstream, and it hasn't mixed yet together.
Ah, so there is a mixture that happens at the confluence, which is a beautiful area that's been preserved, I think, since the '93 flood. They really put a lot of dollars in and people should go down there and check it out. It's so beautiful. You actually see the Illinois, the Missouri, and the Mississippi come together, and they've got a nice little situation set up there. So before the real mix is where St. Louis captures that water and starts cleaning it.
That's correct. We catch it from the western side. If you're flying in and out of St. Louis, you look down. A lot of times you can see the difference in color of river water as it goes by.
There's a difference in color?
Yes,
For
quite
example, what kind of color is like the Illinois River compared to Missouri River and Mississippi?
Well, the Missouri River has a lot more sediment, more soil in it. So it's browner typically than the Mississippi, the upper Mississippi River. So it'll tend to be a little bit lighter in color. Okay,
I did not realize that. In light of the news this past year or so with reference to Flint, Michigan, and what they said in the beginning stages of that story is that that river water was switched off from one situation to another situation, which caused the horrible water situation that happened in Flint. How are we protected from anything happening like that in St. Louis?
Well, for one, our source water is not corrosive. Flint, Michigan, they used water that was corrosive. They needed to add a chemical to make it not corrosive, and they didn't do that. Their previous supplier had been adding that. They did not for whatever reason, so their water was corrosive and tended to leach the metals from the pipes into their system. Oh. And our water naturally from the river is not corrosive, but we also soften the water, and the lime that we add, we raise the pH. We treat it so it's chemically not as corrosive of water, and we're better protected from that.
So for the last few years, St. Louis city water has been known as some of the best water in the country?
Yeah, it has a good reputation. It has a very high quality water, great tasting water. We won a couple of taste contests concerning it. We're very fortunate.
What's the difference from between faucet water, which St. Louis city water is pretty good. I mean, I've lived across the country, both coasts and the third coast, Texas. And the water tastes different. I mean, and say, for example, while living in Los Angeles, I smelled this bleachy smell all the time with reference to the water. Never really drank it at all. I always had bottled water ready to go because that's one of the presets. When you live in LA, you have your bottled water there, you have your clothes ready to go because of earthquakes. And I always kept bottled water in the house. It was, you know, felt kind of weird about showering and bathing in it, but that didn't bother me, surprisingly so. Other parts of the country, like in the East Coast, The water's makes your skin feel a little bit drier. And
Yeah.
it's just a little different from St. Louis. It's just a lot smoother here for whatever reasons. Why is there a difference there?
Well, in part, it's the chemistry of the water. You have soft water, like people are familiar with, and you bathe in that. And a lot of times you never feel like you get the soap off.
Yeah.
But that's just, you get the soap off, it's just the way it feels. But our water is moderately hard, and you don't have that feel to it. Now, if you go get well water, that could be even harder yet, and then you might have trouble getting a good lather of your shampoo. It's all not unhealthy or anything, it's just the different chemistry and how you perceive it.
Now, some of the piping, I'm sure they're going to show some of the photos if they haven't already. You guys do a lot of work here in the city. So you do a lot of replacing of the old pipes from back in the day, or what's going on right now with that?
Well, we are, right now we do the maintenance, we make the repairs, and we also are trying to get, with each rate increase coming down, we'll have a higher component of it devoted to replacing aging infrastructure. And most of our pipe are older, they're long lasting, they should be typically last 100 years, you think. Some of ours is older, lasting fine, others are younger and we're having issues. So we go in, we replace the pipe that tends to break frequently.
Should people do that as well in some of the older homes? Replace some of those pipes as well?
Absolutely, you need to do that. They don't last forever, but they'll last a long time. They're a great investment, but it's something you typically can't see because it's buried or under in the wall or in the floor. But you do it and it'll last you a lifetime.
There had been a news story recently with reference to St. Louis Public Schools, city public schools, and the old piping systems and the drinking water. Are you all working with them closely on monitoring that situation and helping them work with that or correct it?
We've done a little bit, but they have really taken the lead and done the majority of it. And I think what they did is very responsible. They went out and they tested all their drinking fountains and tested other sinks and stuff, and identify where they might have a lead issue. And plus, they test it in the summertime when there's low usage of the water. So it's kind of a worse situation. It's not like during the school where water's constantly turning over. Many of these places, they may not have detected anything during the school year. But in the summertime at school, there's hardly anybody there, no one's using the fountains and stuff. It may be in there a week, and it's not representative of normal usage, but it's a worst case scenario, and if there is an issue, it would show up then.
Now, I know that back in the day, there are these beautiful towers, like the ones on Grand. You've got one on North Grand at like 20th, and you got one at 44 in Grand. There's a third tower as well, and I believe that's north as well. Tell us about those towers, and I forgot to pull down pictures to send over to John to put in to show us, but they're so beautiful.
They are, and it's really a testimony at a time. This is when the city was very proud to have a water system. I mean, they still are proud, but it was not every city had a water system like we had then. So they would spend the money to have these showcase towers. They're not in use anymore.
So they're not used. How about the reservoir that's there at Grand and 44? Is that not in use? Or?
The reservoir is in use, but the tower is not, and it's due to the change of technology. At the time these towers were built, you had piston pumps, just like the pistons in your car. So you had this surge of water being pumped in the system, and that water hammer introduced. These towers were just a standpipe of water open to the air, and that would relieve the surges, the pressure, so that you didn't break your system apart from the water hammer.
So you had to have two towers on both sides of the city to handle the pressure, or to make sure everybody got water? How did that work?
Well, that was to relieve the surge and pressure that this type of pump introduced. Today, our pumps spin, they're centrifugal pumps, and you don't have that surge of water hammer being, as a piston goes in a cycle, pushing water into the system. You don't have that.
You don't have that anymore. I remember as a young person going on field trips down to what they call the waterworks off on Broadway at Chain of Rocks. Do we still do that?
We don't do it so much anymore. It's
no more tours. That was so fun.
It is, and it's something that we may get back to because there's a need to show people.
Yes.
We kind of got away with it after 9/11 because of security issues. You know, at one time, people would go up there and picnic on the grounds and walk through the buildings And no one did anything silly to the facility. And today is a different environment.
Yeah, it is. And there are some beautiful facilities that are there that were built long ago with the architecture.
Yes.
It's just absolutely fabulous. You also have, there's a couple of pumping stations or situations out in the middle of the river. Are those still in operation, those beautiful stone structures out there?
Oh, those are really neat. Those are intake towers. We have 2 intake towers and a intake on the western shore at that plant. Those towers, we're not currently using them, but at some point we're going to get them back into service, because it's nice to have another intake to go to at times as you do maintenance or if there's an issue.
Okay, so what happens when you pull in the plant down there, pulls in the water into the system? What are the mechanisms? Because we got a chance to see all that when we went out there. So what happens when you pull the water in from Mississippi?
Well, the water has a lot of sediment, so we have to remove that. And these are particles that tend to stay suspended. So we add some chemicals so they clump up and get heavy enough to settle out. We also soften the water a little bit and elevate the pH for corrosion control, and it also helps with the removal of the particles. We disinfect the water with chlorine, and we add ammonia to form chloramines so that people are protected from diseases that are waterborne. And we add a little bit of fluoride, and then we add powder activated carbon to remove some of the trace contaminants that are man-made in orange and that are found in the river. But actually those rivers, there's so much volume, there's very little that you detect.
And what happens when those rivers freeze down there? Do we still get the amount of water in we need, or?
Oh, absolutely. We have different levels that we can draw water from.
Ah, so there's all kinds of situations and mechanisms set up to make a total difference when it comes to making sure we have water in the city of St. Louis.
That's right.
We keep the water really tasting good here, feeling good. Are there any other plans for other improvements that we might see coming down the line with the Water Division?
Well, I think as you go further, as we move forward through the years, you're going to see more work out in the system, replacing mains, replacing valves, hydrants, and that type of work. We have some going on now, and that will be ongoing.
That'd be great. Sometimes I'll see the Water Division set up in the middle of a street, like a big one like Kings Highway or Grand. When that happens, it seems like it may be in the middle of the day or the middle of the night. That's water pressure or something happening to a pipe then when something happens like that?
Yeah, typically there is a leak or a break in the main, and we have to dig down and make the repair.
Tell us how important it is, we're about to wrap up here, for young people or people not to mess with the hydrants in the neighborhoods.
It is. It's they mess with the hydrants. Usually they're broken to get them working. That's $7,000 to $15,000 to replace or repair. But it's dangerous for them. You're out there playing in the water, that can knock you down. Drivers can get distracted and run over the kids. It's really sad.
It's very sad, very dangerous, and it costs a lot of money to make sure that you replace those parts to it.
That's correct.
Right, so we just don't want to do that. It's not fun.
Yeah, get the sprinkler out and play in the front yard.
And have a good time. I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about the waterworks. I want to talk more about what's going on in the city, and we've got some great water here.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We should brag more about it, shouldn't we?
I think so.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Kurt. We will be right back with more talk about what's going on with the Blue Line here in St. Louis.
Hi, my name's CJ. A few years ago, my father became seriously ill. I did what I could do before he passed, but it took its toll. I lost my job, my house. I'm getting back on my feet, but I don't know when there'll be food on the table. How'd I do, CJ?
We could be twins.
Well, cousins, maybe.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. you could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Hi, I'm Robin Boyce. Welcome back to City Corner. In the studios with me right now is Mr. Terrell Carter, who is author, activist, and speaker, and he's written a wonderful book that I've had an opportunity to read called Walking the Blue Line. A police officer turned community activist provides solutions to racial divide. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on today.
You're very welcome. You've got a lot to work with here. So much has happened, I would say, within the last 2 years, and specifically here in the St. Louis area with Ferguson and other things, and around the country and the nation. And of course, our most recent presidential election has turned some tides in what's going to happen or projecting forward in this country. But this book, Walking the Blue Line, what led you to put this together?
So I was a police officer for the city of St. Louis for a few years, from 1997 to 2002, and I entered service on the police department with a particular mindset. I thought that I was going to be able to make a major difference in the communities that I lived in and I served, and I learned that being a police officer was not about protecting and serving people. It's about fostering a system that benefits certain people. And so the book was a way for me to express my frustration and to educate people on what law enforcement in places like St. Louis is really like.
Really? So you really did not feel like you could do those really cool, friendly cop community kinds of things as a police officer?
No, you don't get rewarded for doing the really cool, officer-friendly kind of things. You get rewarded for arresting people, and to be truthful, it doesn't matter the circumstances with which you arrest people. You get rewarded on the police department for what they call good policing, and good policing is making as many arrests of a particular nature as possible, and the arrests that they want you to make are dictated by your supervisors, by your sergeants, by your lieutenants, by your captains.
So in policing these days, I would say within the last 20, 30 years, from what I'm hearing from you, is based off on not so much of the protection in community orientation from police officers. It's about going and getting that criminal and locking them up. It's almost like giving out tickets.
It is.
Some municipalities at one time were giving out tickets just to make sure that their coffers were okay. So that's what policing is turned into?
In many ways it is. If you ever look at who receives the honor of Police Officer of the Year, it's never an officer who goes out and is officer friendly, as you said before. It's an officer who has the most arrests in a particular statistical category, and that typically deals with drug arrest or those kinds of things. What I was trained to do was to go into particular neighborhoods and to build my stats, to build my statistics, because that's what the department valued was.
Not to develop the community,
No,
not to make sure that neighbors and folks in the community knew that you were there to really help and protect?
No, and the department is not against that, but that's not what the main priority is. And
Okay.
I'll give you a personal example. I was a public affairs officer for almost a year in the 6th District.
Okay.
A public affairs officer is one of the officers that goes in and does the officer-friendly things, that goes to community meetings, that leads the monthly meetings with people from the neighborhood. We went into high schools, junior highs, and shook children's hands and did all of those things. But that actually was the front. We were more of plainclothes detectives. We used the relationships that we built with people in the community to find out who drug dealers were, to find out where certain activity was occurring, so we could execute search warrants on a regular basis.
Really?
So even as the officer friendly, the real purpose was to build relationships with people who would give us information so we could go execute certain arrests.
When did that change? Because growing up, you really felt protected as a kid when an officer would come by the house or would, patrol the streets or would come through to school. We didn't feel those kinds of things. It just changed, or maybe it was always there and we just didn't see it that way.
Well, so there's a movie out that I believe you're familiar with called 13.
Yes.
That talks about the process of criminalizing certain behaviors or certain actions of certain communities. and concerted efforts by our government to mandate that certain behaviors of certain communities should be watched. And so when did things change? Literally it began during those times with Nixon and some of the legislation that he developed or put forward, some of the legislation that Ronald Reagan put forward. But we also know that there is a certain level of fear of certain communities. And when certain things happen in certain communities or involving certain people, it becomes easier to patrol them in a very particular way or to treat them in a very particular way. And so even before what occurred with Mike Brown, those types of things were happening in certain communities, in particular in St. Louis City.
And on a consistent basis. You have moved from becoming a police officer to an activist. What brought you to that point?
I was always an activist. I mean, I am a person of faith. I'm a Christian, and I believe that people should be treated particular ways. People should be treated with love, with respect, be treated as equals. And again, I went into my employment as a police officer with that kind of mindset, but I learned very quickly that the system was not built for that. And I actually left the department because I ended up having to testify against one of my partners who falsified a major drug arrest and stole some money from some people. And he actually ended up doing time in the federal penitentiary. So I realized that I would not survive on the police department after telling the truth and standing up for something like that.
Is that what that blue line is called?
It is. The blue line is you, and in the book I say very clearly that one of the first rules for any police officer is don't get another officer in trouble. Don't ever do anything to cause another officer to look bad or to be considered not a good officer. And if you do, you literally put your own life at jeopardy. And I don't say that with any kind of...
right.
You literally... And I knew I couldn't survive as a police officer.
You worked with some good guys who are still on the force, too.
Right.
Yeah, and they're doing a good job out there.
And I appreciate you saying that. My concern is that when we say things like that, that minimizes... Not that you are intentionally doing this or that. But we minimize the fact that we have to be more vigilant in rooting out these negative officers. And to be truthful, I think that almost any officer has the ability to not be a good officer. The temptation is too great. Power, the phrase is absolute power corrupts absolutely. What I was taught in the academy and on the street was police officers have a magic pen. And what that means is that your testimony, what you say as a police officer, is the truth, regardless of what actually happened. Because when you get in front of a jury, when you get in front of a judge, when you even get in front of the public, they're going to believe you before they believe the person that you arrested. And so I think that most officers are tempted by that on a daily basis. Now, whether it's on a small scale, I'm just going to write you a ticket because you aggravated me, versus, hey, I know you're a drug dealer and you have $10,000 here, and I'm going to take that $10,000. In practicality, it's a totally different thing, but on the base level, it's actually the same thing.
Wow. That says a lot about the culture of being a police officer and being around police officers. And reading this book, it was almost like a workbook. Did you intentionally write it so it could be like that to help people understand?
I did. So I began writing this book immediately after Mike Brown was killed a few years ago. I write for a site called Ethics Daily, and I began to write columns telling people that there's going to be more to the story.
So you've got a blog going?
So I write now for Ethics Daily. I also write for the Huffington Post. But the point is that this book began as a blog, and I tried to write it in a way that would be accessible to anyone.
It's a good read. It really is a good read. You can go, it's a fast read as well, but it's very informative and great insight into, for example, are police too heavy-handed?
The answer
one
is
of your chapters, life patrolling the streets, are police jaded? Racial profiling, does it work? Why police officers never snitch on one another, which you just talked about. Why police officers always seem angry. Why do police officers always seem angry?
Because they are dealing with other people's problems first and foremost. No one ever calls 911 when something good is happening. They typically call 911 when something has gone wrong. And so they're in a high-stress situation. Just imagine being an officer that every call that you go to in an 8-hour time frame is like that. It's hard to see why it's easy to see why some officers get jaded and are frustrated on a regular basis.
Most the black police officers I've met, and in hearing a story, I remember a few years back, a young man, 22 years old, wasn't on the streets as a police officer just a little bit, but he was killed patrolling his own neighborhood.
Right. I
And
remember that.
unfortunately, I believe they named the street after him. But this young man had the same ideology you had. I want to go out and change my community. I want to do the right things. But then his own community turned on him.
Right.
How do African Americans who happen to be law enforcement people feel about being in that situation and knowing, God, what am I going to do here?
Well, I mean, I've experienced it as well, and every black police officer, I believe, experiences it. One of the things we have to do is try to, this is going to sound trite probably, but it's to educate people about what policing is really about and why police become involved in our communities in the first place. You have the instance, typically it's one of two ways. Either a police officer is called or a police officer is looking to make an arrest so they can build their statistics. And educating our families, our friends, the people in the communities that we live in, how not to be involved in either one of those things.
It's so important.
Yeah, it is.
It's so important that they understand that. During your journey as a police officer, you got your artistic skills pumped up. We have some photographs, I hope we can show them, of some of the things that you've done. Why did you put these pieces together? Was it a stress reliever for you? Or some of the things that you have words behind some of the pieces that were really interesting?
It was. Some of the images are images that I created specifically about my experience as a police officer and the frustration. The images that are abstract with the words behind them have been created in the last few years in response to Mike Brown's shooting. Those are images from a series called Good Negroes, and it talks about people's expectations of African American males and why can't we just do what we're told? Why can't we just?
That's a whole nother book.
It is.
It's just a whole. How about that's a movie or a series that we come up with? We got on the big screen right now where people can reach you. I really appreciate you, Terrell, coming in and talking with us about your book. It's called Walking the Blue Line. A police officer turned community activist provides solutions to the racial divide. I want to thank you so much, young man, for
Thank you
coming
again for
on.
having me on.
And you can come back anytime, and I'll get a panel discussion of some other former police officers up here, and we'll go at it.
I'll be more than happy to
I
participate
appreciate
in
it. And I really do appreciate you for tuning in to City Corner. See you the next time. Enjoy this episode and tell everybody about it. Hi, I'm Robin Boyce, and see you next time.